There we go. Sorry. We'll do that again. Like I said, tech challenges today, right? Oh my goodness, but I appreciate you being there with me. That's just wonderful. Thank you so much for spending the next few minutes with me. Today we're talking about popular iridology versus holistic iridology. And that's a really interesting contrast. And I say that because it's probably safe to say that most people who practice iridology consider themselves to be holistic. But I have to ask the question, are they really genuinely, truly holistic, or maybe not? I want to introduce myself before we dive into this. My name is Judith Cobb. I'm a master herbalist, a certified comprehensive iridology instructor, a certified iridologist, a natural nutrition clinical practitioner, all kinds of stuff under my belt. And I have been practicing and coaching people, both clients in my clinic and other practitioners, for nearly 40 years. And I've studied several different styles of iridology over those years. And so we're going to be looking at a lot of eyes in a minute as we dive in. But I would love to know who you are and where you're from. So if you just take just a moment and just give me your name and where you're from, that would be great. It's just fun to see how all of this tech reaches all over the world, right? Kind of fun. While we're waiting for a few more people to join us, because Instagram takes a minute to get the word out, just wanted to invite you to hop on over to bit.ly/3-professional secrets. If you are a practicing herbalist or naturopath or nutrition coach, maybe you're even using iridology, what I like to share in this little document called 3 Professional Secrets is some things that a lot of us practitioners do incorrectly. Things, and that might sound like a bold statement, but there's a lot of things that we were taught to do in school that actually don't work well in a clinical setting and that don't benefit our clients either. So I invite you to hop on over to bit.ly/3-professional-secrets to grab that little document and just start getting a feel for maybe some things that you would like to improve in your own practice. We are going to be, like I said, looking at a lot of eyes today. But when I first started out in iridology 40 years ago, there was not much available for training or for iris maps. And when I started with this map right here. Some of you may recognize this if you've been around for a while. This was the Bernard Jensen map of the day. And I studied back then what I'm going to call popular iridology. Now, I don't want anyone to think that I am dissing Dr. Jensen. I am not. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And I truly believe that were it not for him, iridology would not be where it is now. We do know, however, that what happened was the iridology he was practicing was still in its infancy. Research has been going on since the 1800s, and we know that. But as we got to World War II, communication between North America and Europe stopped, and all of the great research was really happening in Europe. And so that was where the knowledge that we had here in North America about iridology got halted. And so from World War II up until the early 1980s, there was no further development in iridology. And as a result of that, it meant we got stuck. Europe continued with their research, we got stuck. Now we have, since the early 1980s, we have what we know of as constitutional iridology, because Harry Wolff got his hands on some of that European research that was written in German, because Harry could read German, and he started studying it. And that was how constitutional started to move forward here in North America. And constitutional is what I'm going to refer to today as holistic iridology. One of the things we need to be aware of is the intense difference between the maps that a popular iridologist would use versus what a constitutional iridologist would use. As we look at these maps here, what we are going to see is these are very old school maps. These are all pretty much based, it seems, on Jensenian kind of work. One of the challenges that I have with them is that when you look at these maps, some of these reaction fields are so tiny. They look huge when you're looking at an 8.5 by 14-inch piece of paper, right? Because the eye is like this. But when we shrink that down to the actual size of an eyeball, these reaction fields would be like 1 or maybe 2 trabeculae or fibers wide. And that's a challenge because if your client is not perfectly level, if your imaging device, your camera, for instance, is not perfectly level, you are going to misplace, you're going to misidentify what markings are all about. And that's a challenge because you don't want to be misidentifying something ever. So instead, or rather, this is typically the kind of iridology that is practiced on Facebook and on Instagram. And that's really, really sad because this is a very, almost an allopathic approach. It's this marking means this, and we do this. There's no deeper interpretation. Now, that's not very holistic in my humble opinion to do a marking for marking correlation. We also know that that is not accurate anymore. The research that has continued in Europe tells us that that is inaccurate. Instead, and I studied that kind of iridology. That was the iridology that I started with in the 1980s, the early 1980s. The early 1990s, I was blessed to be able to learn constitutional iridology. And with that came learning a whole lot of different things. Now, this is a constitutional map. It's the one that I've developed based on my 30 years of experience as a constitutional iridologist, and also based on the work of other iridologists who are constitutional, right? Just updating and tweaking and adding more information because we know more now. What I want you to notice about this map is that it includes only organs. We don't have a place here for the arm. We don't have a place here for the foot. We don't have a place here for the earlobe, right? We have only organs that affect the body chemistry. And that's going to give us information about a person's constitution. We don't, and we need it this way because we don't actually have a herb that specifically works on the renal pelvis. We don't have a herb that specifically works on the ureters or the urethra or, you know, those minute little areas. We have herbs that work on the kidneys. And so we need to understand how the whole kidney works, not how a certain part of the kidney works. So constitutional iridology is a much more holistic approach. And this is so important. We don't get caught up in teeny tiny details. Instead, we understand and we study how organs work together, how they affect each other. Right? We're not looking just for what this one organ is doing. We want to know, how does it affect everything? How is this one organ potentially going to affect the entire constitution of the body? This is so important. This is why it's important for iridologists to also have a strong foundation in anatomy and physiology, right? If you don't understand how the body works, it does you no good to do an iris assessment. Seriously. Let's look at an eye. The first thing that we look at when we are looking at an eye is the overall color. The overall color. This teaches us about the general overarching inherent tendencies within the body. So when we look at this eye, it's a blue eye. I don't think there's any debate about that. It's a blue eye. Eye has different inherent potentials, different things, different health risks and strengths that they've inherited from parents, grandparents, great-grandparents than someone who has a hazel eye. Someone who has a hazel eye has an entirely different set of inherent potentials and inherent predispositions. And we contrast that with the true brown eye. Again, an entirely different set of inherent potentials. Everything we see in an iris gives us greater insight into our clients' inherent health predispositions. Nothing we see in an iris is a guarantee of a problem, right? Because our client didn't put things in their iris. Their parents, their grandparents, and their great-grandparents put the things in the iris that are there. We also need to consider when we're looking at an eye, these little flecks. Now, in the old school or in the popular iridology, these flecks would represent toxicity. They would represent drugs that had been consumed or heavy metals that had been deposited in the body. In constitutional or holistic iridology, that is not the case. In constitutional iridology, we don't look at this and say this person needs cleansing. These are going to disappear, because they're not. And this person may need cleansing, but it's not because of those dots. Instead, these are inherent. These teach us about things that this person has inherited. These teach us about those inherent predispositions. Each different color of pigment teaches us about another organ that, or teaches us about a specific organ that is predisposed to particular types of imbalances. Where the pigment is sitting in the eye teaches us about which other organs may be impacted by the first organ having an imbalance. We are never going to get those pigments out of the eye. They weren't deposited there because of something this person did. Those pigments, however, give us a tremendous insight as to the inherent potentials of the body. Sometimes these pigments develop early in life. We see them become visible early in life. We see the most rapid development of the iris from birth to age 6. And that makes sense, doesn't it? When you think about a newborn baby, that baby's body is not mature. You don't take a brand new baby and feed it steak and potatoes, right? You give it mother's milk, ideally, because that's what its body can handle. The iris is also not mature at birth. It continues to mature rapidly over the first 6 months, a little bit slower over the next 5.5 years, and it continues to age and mature until we die. So what that means is that in that first 6 years of life is when we are going to see more of these kinds of things surface or become obvious, if indeed they're going to be. And then after the age of 6, we may still see pigments become obvious because there is an inherent program in the body that says at this age, this organ may decide to begin to struggle a little bit, right? So the pigment is not a guarantee of a struggle. It's a predisposition to the struggle. This client may be doing absolutely everything right to support the organ that put this pigment here, in which case this client may have no symptoms. But the body still knows that that organ wants to have a struggle. Does that make sense? In North America, this iris would represent someone who was extremely toxic. If we're doing the North American or the popular iridology, and this person would be told that they require massive amounts of cleansing. This person would also be told, based on these rings, that they had undergone a tremendous amount of stress and that they were under a lot of stress right now, and that if they get their life in order and take the right supplements, these rings will disappear. In constitutional iridology instead, we know that these colors in this eye actually suggest a predisposition towards liver insufficiencies that could have an impact on the digestive system, so the stomach and the intestines. That could have a strong impact on the body's ability to actually transport nutrients throughout the body. The rings in the eye tell us that this person more likely functions under the influence primarily of their sympathetic nervous system. And so they're more likely to stress out. They're always ready for the next crisis. And it tells us other things, that this person is an achiever. They like to-do lists. They like to accomplish things. They take great satisfaction in getting things done and reaching goals. So what does that teach us about the person? That they may need specific nutritional support to sustain them when they are working on big projects, right? They may need ongoing nervous system support to help them not be overreactive in situations. That's all it teaches us. Those rings are not going to go away. That pigment is not going to go away. That's always going to be there as a reminder of what the potential imbalances are. In North America, in the popular iridology, this person would be told because of these lines that they have parasites. In constitutional iridology or holistic iridology, what this actually says is not parasites, because we only see in the iris things that are inherent, things that are coded in our DNA. Parasites aren't coded in our DNA. Parasites don't change our DNA. We can't pass that DNA for parasites onto our children in our eggs and sperm. It doesn't work like that. These people, instead, that have these little dark lines radiating out, especially when they've got these rings coming around here, are prone to having, again, those sympathetic nervous system responses. That's where their body lives, is in the sympathetic nervous response zone. And so again, if these people have an intense lifestyle, our job as their therapist is to actually coach them, to help them do what they need to support their adrenal glands. We need to also coach them to make sure they get enough rest, right? So important. I just need to plug in my other computer before my battery dies. There we go. The next layer of information we consider in constitutional iridology is the fiber structure. How are the individual threads sitting in the eye? Are they making loopy patterns like this? Are they radiating out? Are they a little crisscrossy or zigzaggy? This layer of information, again, adds to our understanding of the organ systems and their inherent predispositions. So a popular iridologist would map out every one of these leaf or petal-shaped marks in the eye, and they would say that every one of these was some area that had a crisis, and if there was white lines in here, that area was healing. So we would expect that if this person had broken an arm, that if we were using an iris map, as they do, that has an area for the arm, that we would actually see one of these loops form. And as the arm healed, we would see lines in there. Now, I do an entirely separate presentation on broken bones, where we actually prove that that's not correct at all. So, but in the popular iridology, this person that we're looking at actually has, according to popular iridology, issues in their brain, pituitary, bronchioles, adrenals, kidneys, perineum, rectum, bronchus, and parathyroid. Popular iridology teaches that when these people do the right kind of work, all of these loops are going to disappear. In my 40 years of being an iridologist, I have never seen fiber structure change in an eye. Just saying. In constitutional iridology and holistic iridology, this eye with all of these loops suggests that we need to ask questions about the personal and family history of endocrine symptoms, especially the adrenals and the pituitary. We know that these markings are passed down for 3 to 4 generations. So it may mean that there's actually not an issue for this person. And it may mean that this person maybe thwarted the issue by figuring out really early on in life what kind of foods they needed to eat, what kind of supplements they needed, what kind of lifestyle they needed. So they're doing all the right things to support their body, but the blueprint still says this person has the risk. So if this person jumped ship and went from a beautiful holistic lifestyle to eating junk food and drinking pop and partying hard and using all kinds of drugs, but prescription or illicit or whatever, and they stopped taking care of themselves, we would likely begin to see some kinds of issues surfacing for them. In North American Iridology, every fiber that is going a little bit weird, that's going against the grain, if you will, and every pigment is a problem happening right now that needs to be addressed. That is the iridology I did for the first 10 years of my professional career. And, you know, it would be so depressing. I'd be doing this iris assessment with a client and I would fire hose them with all these things that their eyes said were wrong. Only they would tell me that they didn't have any of those problems. And, you know, they just didn't. There's not that much wrong with a person and they're still alive. That just doesn't happen. But then we would still do the cleanses and the supplements and everything and nothing would change. With holistic iridology, with constitutional iridology, the idea is to integrate the markings to help us understand how the inherent predispositions can work together to create symptoms that the client is experiencing. Markings have different value as well, and a different levels of impact depending on what other markings are present with it. And more than this, this deeper understanding allows us to really easily create programs that address more than just the symptoms, but actually take us to the root of the client's problem. Does that make sense? You know, if we saw a marking on one of the popular iridology maps that said there was a sinus issue, a popular iridologist would attack the sinuses as the problem. A constitutional iridologist would take it back and would say, what is the digestive system doing? What is the liver doing? Right? To figure out where the root of the problem is to enable us to create a useful program for them. North American iridologists would say that a person like this, or a popular iridologist would say a person like this has a weak constitution. How does that sit with you? How would you like to be the one on the other side of the desk and you're being told you've got a weak constitution? Doesn't that just make you feel deflated? Even when I say it, it makes me feel deflated, and I'm not even talking about me. With constitutional iridology, we know that this is the eye of someone who is what we call a connective tissue type. With that understanding, we know that we are going to probably need to support their digestion because their collagen structure tends to not be as robust as we would like it to be. So we need to support their digestion. We need to support their food choices in order for them to actually be able to build stronger collagen to be able to hold them together. In constitutional iridology, each and every marking, and by marking we mean things like this, and like this, and like this, and all of these, and this, Every individual marking is not important in constitutional iridology. What is important is how the marks integrate with each other, how they play off each other, how they inform each other. So important. We need to make sure that when we are doing an iris assessment, that we take a step back and we look at the big picture first, rather than dissecting this person down into little teeny itty bitty bits. Because when we see and understand the interrelationship of all the various constitutional markers, we can not only educate our client to help them resolve issues that they might be having, but we can also educate our client and help them work preventively. How powerful is that? To be able to understand the inherent potentials to create lifestyle programs and supplement programs that could stall off or prevent the onset of health problems. Is that amazing or what? It's almost like we've got a Star Trek tricorder, right? And when we do it the constitutional way, we don't get bogged down in details. I used to write lists of each marker, what organ reaction field they were sitting in, what the negative potential was because that marker was there. Lists and lists and lists. It was overwhelming for me. It was overwhelming for my clients, and it didn't do any of us a bit of good. Understanding the constitutional has blessed my clients in so many ways. When we do holistic or constitutional iridology, using the map is actually the very last step of the assessment. And sometimes we don't even go to the map at all. Because as we look at the eye, we look at the color, we look at how the fibers are laying, we look at the different pigments that are in the eye. That alone, coupled with what the client wants our help with, gives us so much information to work with that we actually often don't need to dissect this person into teeny tiny bits. And by doing iridology this way, it helps us to do a few things. It helps us to actually not overwhelm our clients. We can take that step back and we can work on things one level at a time with them so that they don't get snowballed, so they don't end up feeling hopeless. It helps us also as practitioners to be able to chunk down the homework we want to give our client. Because the old way, where we had this massive list of all of these things that was wrong, and that every one of those things had something that we could do about it, so we had a massive list of homework, nobody could do that. They'd try, they might do it for 36 hours, and then they'd give up because it was too much. When we do it constitutionally and we are able to trace the issue back to the root, we can start with the root. Give 2 or 3 little pieces of homework for the root, little pieces of homework, things that will have an impact, but that are doable so our client can be successful, right? When they have success with those 2 or 3 pieces of homework, we can add a little bit more. And then a while later, we can add a little bit more. So we're crafting a new diet, a new lifestyle, a new supplement program for our client, constantly molding it to be what it needs to be optimal for our client to experience optimal success and optimal wellness. How does that sound? Is that powerful or what? It is so amazing. You know, the 30 years that I've spent doing constitutional iridology have been night and day different for me and for my clients. The results my clients get, oh my goodness, so different from what they got when I was doing the popular iridology. So different. My life is different. It's so much easier to do constitutional because I can do as much of an analysis as I need to and create as much of a program as I need to right in my client sessions, where I used to spend 3 or 4 hours doing iris analysis and writing it all out for my clients and then Sometimes they wouldn't come back and I just wasted all that time. Right? So much better for everybody when we do the constitutional iridology. Constitutional iridology teaches us what questions to ask. Popular iridology tells us what to say. Do you see the difference? I can tell my client with the old popular stuff, I would tell them all kinds of things, and it would be too much. With constitutional, it teaches me what questions to ask. That helps me create deeper rapport, helps me understand my client better, helps me know what I can and can't do with them. But it also helps me to understand their body better. Iridology is not a crystal ball. It's an insight tool that we can use. And with that, I'm going to just plant a little seed here. My next section of Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology, which is an iridology program that meets all of the requirements for the International Iridology Practitioners Association certification, is going to be starting in mid-April. I think it's going to be an afternoon class. I'm still working out the day of the week and the time of day, but I think it's going to be 2 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. And details will be forthcoming as I get them worked out. But I'm just putting this out there so that if you're interested, you can private message me, or we can be in touch and we can make sure that you get the details you need. As you can tell, even though my original training all those years ago was the popular iridology, jumping ship and going to constitutional was the best thing I could do, absolutely, in so many ways. I was frustrated with the popular iridology. I was always wrong. I was telling my clients what was wrong with them, and they were saying, no, it wasn't. It just simply didn't work for me. Constitutional, oh my goodness, just has changed my practice. It's changed my life. It's changed my clients' lives. It's so brilliant. It's just the way to do this. Now, again, registration isn't open for this next course that is starting in the middle of April. And I haven't even given you all of the details of the course. So, you don't want to register yet, that's for sure. But if you want to make sure that you hear about when it's going to open up, I invite you to go to a website. It's called iridology.education. iridology.education. You're going to see a little pop-up there that gives you the opportunity to opt in for the iris map. And when you opt in to receive that download, that will add you to my email list. And then you'll know when things are happening because you'll get emails from me twice a week. And so with that, I thank you so much for being with me today. I've had a lot of fun. I love teaching. I love sharing what I know. And I'm so grateful that you've been with me. Just before we wrap up, just want to check any questions. Is everyone good? Any questions about anything we talked about today? And we've got Roberto with us on the webinar, actually saying the approach makes sense. Thank you, Roberto. I think it makes sense too. It just totally works for me. And I think it could work for you. You've got an amazing background. Holy doodle, an amazing background. So yeah, awesome. Not seeing anything come in on Instagram. I'm not seeing anything come in on Facebook, but that's okay. Thank you again for being with me. I so appreciate your time today. And we do this again on Tuesday with a different topic. So hopefully we'll see you then. Bye for now.